Test, test. Yeah. All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get going here this morning. Okay, everybody should have a timeline, and there's pens here if you end up needing them. Let me know. But table 3. Well, I told everybody to sit at a common table, and so, I invited that problem to myself. Okay, hey, we are on week 11, and if you remember, weeks 11 and 12 were very special weeks in this class because we get to bring this idea of a spiritual timeline to life. And so we kind of pivoted from the original strategy of having folks come up and share their timelines. Instead, the last 2 weeks, we're just going to spend time creating our timeline together. And so you've made it through 10 weeks of honestly listening to me lecture. I didn't anticipate it to be that way. But now, I just want this to be a conversation and discussion. So what we're going to do today is just kind of recap, over the last 10 weeks, what we talked about, what we were really trying to get out of this class, and then we're going to go into putting that into practice. And we're actually going to start out filling out our timelines and putting some pen to paper on these things so that hopefully you have something you can take away as a tangible output from the past several weeks. So we're going to spend the next 2 weeks doing that. Next week, I'll do a little more kind of like wrap up summary, but I thought we'd just kind of jump into the creation part today. So remember, going back to the very first week, we're trying to answer these questions. What does it mean to be a spiritual leader? What does it take to become the leader God wants me to be? How do I find my purpose, my gift mix? And what might God be doing in my life now to prepare me for the future? We talked about some of the goals of the class, anticipating what God's doing in our lives, understanding the providence and the things that happened in the past and how they might shape the future. And we're hoping that at the end of this, we'll be able to craft a powerful testimony, even if there's no major events or barriers or any type of challenges that you faced in life. There are ordained things happening in your life that point to God and point to God's provision. So hopefully at the end of this, we will get that process map, number 1, but also number 2, a powerful testimony about our faith journey. So let's just very quickly recap the timeline and kind of how it starts. It starts with these phases. And so looking at the leadership timeline of Joseph, we see he has these particular phases. And sovereign foundations was the circumstance he was born into, growing up with his brothers. He was then sold into slavery, and that was where he experienced some isolation and some moments of finding who he was. That was his inner life growth period. He was tested by God. Remember the integrity checks, the obedience checks at that point. And then he moved into the ministry maturing phase. He started serving Potiphar's house. He started gaining trust with Potiphar's household. He was challenged again with an integrity check when Potiphar's wife approached him. And then again challenged with isolation when he was put into prison for refusing her advances and things getting spun in a different way than they actually happened. That time in prison really shaped him and formed him. He started having dreams, interpreting dreams, and that led him into interpreting a dream for Pharaoh and then taking over the kingdom of Egypt as he moved into that convergence moment. And then obviously after that, living in Egypt out the rest of his days, that was kind of his afterglow phase. So, that from a very broad lens is how these phases happen in our lives. And we're going to start there today and then slowly put in these process items. So if we move ahead to the full timeline, we have the same phases, but then we have all of these sub-process items in between within each phase that help to grow us, advance us, move us forward, and ultimately shift us into the next phase. So again, not everybody is going to have something for each of these line items, but hopefully you'll be able to identify with 1 or 2 and mark those down on your timeline as you think about what's happening intra-phase over time. So what I want to start with, we'll just stay on this slide for now. What I want to start with, actually let's go back 1 so it's not so confusing. I want to start with the big things. So we're going to start at the phase level. So what I want you to do, we're going to take 5 or 10 minutes on this timeline that you have in front of you. I want you to just write out the big events in your life. Just write them down. It could be, coming to Christ, how you grew up in faith. It could be when you were baptized. It could be getting married. It could be having a child or children, job changes. these life-changing moments that kind of bookend periods of your life, let's start there at the macro level. Because oftentimes our phases are kind of bookended by these big changes and big events. So let's start on these phases. You know, most of us are probably no further than phase 4, but you don't have to assign them to any phase in particular right now. Just write down, like, hey, what are the big things when I think about my life that have happened to me? So let's start there. We'll take 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk through some more detail. All right, does everybody have a couple things down, or you need a few more minutes? Couple people. Okay, let's give it 1 or 2 more minutes. Okay, if you're still writing, that's totally fine. Feel free to keep writing. But what I want us to do with this is just kind of keep this list off to the side for now. If you've already been able to slot it into a phase, then great. If not, there's a very different way of doing this exercise where you just basically write down as many things as you can think of on a bunch of sticky notes. And then as you kind of go through the timeline and the processes and the sub-processes, you just start assigning those sticky notes to phases and things that are happening. So you kind of start labeling them as you understand that. The other way is like, hey, you might just know already where it is, and that's totally fine. So don't feel like these have to belong in a box. You can keep them on the side, and then as we go through this, hopefully you'll be able to place them in the right spot, okay? Give me a couple of examples. Did anybody write down marriage as a big life event? That was definitely one for me, okay? Children, job change or career change, anything like that? Yeah? Michael, I assume you and Lisa maybe have had put your missionary experience there, right? As a pretty big change, a pretty big event in your life. Okay, good. Okay, so remember, keep these in mind. Keep these in mind as kind of bookends or transitions as we go throughout our phases. But now let's jump into reviewing phase 1 very quickly in our Sovereign Foundations phase, and then I'm going to give you some more time to do that again. So we'll jump ahead 2 slides here to our Sovereign Foundations recap, and just remember when we talked about this phase back in week 3, kind of how we define it. So phase 1, Sovereign Foundations, it's usually our kind of growing up years. It's the circumstances that we're born into. There's not really a lot of control that we have on this phase, but God has already laid a groundwork and ordained personality traits, character traits, people, circumstances that we were born into, culture. He's already embedded that inside of us to prepare us for what he's going to call us to do later on in life. And some people are not born into a good environment, into a Christian environment or into a safe environment. But God's redemptive hand can be found in our brokenness even early on, using what is bad to bring forth good. Thinking about the way Joseph grew up with his brothers and the jealousy and the hate that formed in that relationship. Moses, being left in a basket in the river and found and rescued, training to become Pharaoh, right? Like, it doesn't always start with an ideal circumstance, but God is still using us in whatever that circumstance is. A transition moment out of Sovereign Foundations might be a conversion experience where we make faith our own. Maybe it's a baptism, maybe it's coming to know Christ and accepting Christ, but usually that's kind of the bookend for phase number 1. And our primary lesson here is to learn how to respond positively to people, to even ministry tasks very early on. Take advantage of what God has done in these foundations for us. So think about phase 1 here. We're going to go through the 5 process items real quick, and then we're going to leave this slide up, and I'm going to ask you to think about if any of these occurred early in your life. So number 1 that we talked about was destiny preparation, and this is some moment or experience that hints at further significance down the road. So it could be a moment of foreshadowing. The example I think I gave early on was a former preacher of ours, Steve Clower at Southside Church of Christ in Fort Worth, mentioned that his dad gifted him a pulpit at a young age when he was a kid, and he ended up becoming a preacher. And so he felt like that was a destiny preparation moment for him, being given that pulpit and prepared for that role at a young age. I did not have a destiny preparation moment like that, so you may not either, but think about that one. Mentors or divine contacts, this is one that I did have. A person who offers leadership guidance or encouragement maybe early on in your life. It could be a father, it could be a friend, it could be an uncle, a family member, or someone outside of that really influenced you at an early age and shaped kind of who you are. Giftedness discovery would be moments where we learn what our gifts might be, and that could be by serving, being asked to do small tasks. It's generally not something very large in scope at this point because we're still fairly young in this phase, but giftedness discovery is a process item for us in phase 1. Spiritual authority insights, recognition of credibility that God is giving you. The spiritual authority insights and ministry affirmations kind of go hand in hand in that they are affirming certain spiritual gifts or experiences as we respond positively to what God is calling us to do. The difference, I would say, is that spiritual authority insights often might be a form of encouragement from a person, and a ministry affirmation might be more of a sense from God or a confirmation from God that we're doing the right thing and moving in the right direction. So, to be honest, the labels don't really matter as much as just identifying some of these things that might have happened in your life and understanding their significance and their purpose in confirming whatever it is that you were doing where you felt affirmed as a gift that you have or as a route that God is going to lead you down in the future. Okay, let's spend a little bit of time thinking about sovereign foundation process items. So let's leave this slide up. We'll give you another 5 or 10 minutes to discuss with your table if you want to, or write them down. And then I'm going to ask you to share a couple of examples specifically for anyone who felt like they can identify one of these in their lives. right, how we doing? Just checking in. Will, you need a timeline? I got you. Okay, so okay, hopefully you were able to get one or two of those down, if not more. That would be great. Did anyone have a destiny preparation item? Raise your hand if you had a destiny preparation process item. Might be the rarest one. Okay, I'm not surprised. That's okay. What about a mentor or divine contact? Raise your hand if you had a mentor or divine contact in your life. Okay, a lot. All right, great. So many of you. Who might be willing to share about their mentor or divine contact? Michael, you don't mind? Okay, I'm going to hand you the mic here so our colleagues can hear us online.
So our table talked about we all had sort of varied experiences growing up, but a lot of it pointed back to the mentors. I had several, so the church I grew up in didn't have a youth minister, so there were several adults who were mentors, and I spent a lot of time with. So
yeah, I love that.
that's the best description.
Someone else at this table. One more.
I grew up in the church from the day I was born, so we had youth ministers, we had FCA sponsors, we had all of those youth camp folks, so I didn't know anything different than that as far as my growing up.
Is there any, for any of you, is there any particular, do you feel like they kind of informed your ministry philosophy and shaped some of your principles, or are there specific things that stand out where they impacted you on, a phrase that they used to use a lot that stuck with you, or was it generally just, hey, that kind of molded and shaped me into who I became?
I think it was just general, their example, how
Yeah.
they lived. And when you spend enough time with people, you see how they live, and you try to pick up on things like that.
Yeah.
Some people don't, but I think it was mainly their example.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Okay, anyone else want to share about their mentor or divine contact? Or anyone feel like, yes, over here? Will? Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't see you.
Before I was a believer, I was a teenager and my dad was terminally ill. And there were several in the congregation that brought communion to my dad every week. And it was just someone else mentioned example. And they would share a lot of things every week. I mean, it wasn't long, but they really just showed by action. And if there's any need they had, they cared about it more than just provided. And so that spoke a lot to me. And I've thought about them ever since.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great example. Thank you. Okay, how about giftedness discovery? Hopefully you all had a moment or moments of giftedness discovery growing up. Any specific examples that you want to share about giftedness discovery? I know for me it was a lot of small things. Teaching kids class, leading a prayer, passing communion from the time I was in 7th grade on, mowing the grass at church, taking meals to shut-ins. There were just so many small things that I think looking back seemed insignificant, but they were really, helping me discover things that I enjoyed doing. And part of that was discovering that at my core, helping people is something that I have a large passion for, and I feel most fulfilled from helping people. And a lot of the things that I was asked to do from a young age really pointed me towards that. Okay, how about spiritual authority insights or ministry affirmation? How many of you experienced that? Someone who encouraged you on something you were doing, someone who pushed you a little bit into something that you might have been uncomfortable with. It could be a simple word of encouragement, or it could be a sense that God is confirming in you, this is who I want you to be. If you don't mind. The people online want to hear us.
Oh gosh, that's not
I think
pressure at all.
Last I checked, there were about 400, so not too many.
Okay. Yeah. So I worked at the Children's Place for about 7 years, teaching pre-K, and then the position for the director job came open, and I am a reluctant leader, so I didn't just jump out and say, wanted to do it or try out for it or anything. And there were other women that were very qualified that did turn in their applications, and I was fine with them being my leader as, staying the pre-K teacher. But I went to a couple of our elders. It was Donnie Edwards and several. It was a group of them, and I just, I talked to them a little bit and asked about, communication between the church and the Children's Place. And I was already teaching Bible class and working at the Children's Place teaching pre-K. So I kind of had one foot in the church and one foot at the Children's Place.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a passion for both of them. And so in talking to them, they were kind of like, well, we were wondering why you didn't just step forward and apply for the job. Like, it's yours if you want it. Like, they didn't even talk about interviewing me or anything. And then I was kind of thinking, I don't know if I'd do a good job, because leading children is a lot different than leading adults. And I knew that, and I knew the difference in it, and I knew the pressure of it, and I didn't know if I wanted to take that over. I did, and the leadership at the church was completely 100% behind me, and they were great. And so I ended up doing it for 8 years. And anyways, it was just, I don't think I would have normally done it without going and speaking to them first. And then actually, I was affirmed by other people too. Like, I was affirmed by Ryan and other people in my family, and then other friends from church too, once I started talking about it. But at first, when I didn't say anything, it was kind of like nobody knew that I would be interested. But honestly, if it weren't for that affirmation, I probably wouldn't have done it, just because that's not my character.
Yeah.
So.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Okay, anyone else? Okay, I'm going to pick on the Shuttlesworths for a second, just because of your missionary background and experience. Was there anything, even at an early age, that each of you experienced that you felt like prepared you to go into the mission field, or maybe foreshadowed that a little bit? And if not, totally fine. I'm just curious.
I think it all happened in the next section.
Yeah, okay, fair. Fair.
I went on a mission trip in 7th grade. I wasn't even supposed to be on the trip because I was too young, but I begged and begged and begged, and I could meet the requirements for the preparation, and they would allow me to go, and that was my first taste of being out in the mission field, and loved it.
Yeah, okay, so Lisa said she went on a mission trip in 7th grade that she wasn't supposed to go on, and begged and begged and begged and finally got to go, and that was her first taste of missionary experience. So I'm going to say that could be a little bit of destiny preparation for you, Lisa, as you think about phase 1. Okay, let's very quickly recap phase 2, and then until the next bell rings, I'll just give you a little bit of time to think about phase 2, and then we'll come back and talk about that at the beginning of class. So let's jump ahead one more slide to phase 2, inner life growth. These are typically our kind of young adult years. So depending on when you came to know Christ and when you were baptized, it could be a little bit later in your life, or it could be a little bit earlier in your life, depending on how you grew up. This is when we really kind of shift in perspective and our faith becomes our own. and we kind of desire to know God in a very personal, intimate way, he starts kind of testing us a little bit. We might get experience through a little bit of training. We might have a more formal mentorship or apprenticeship, depending on what our degree is, if you're in college or something like that. But this is where God starts to test our obedience. He starts to test our faith a little bit and say, how faithful are you going to be to me? How obedient are you going to be to me? And kind of creating these spiritual stepping stones and these building blocks that we can then later on in life fall back on and know that God is faithful, that God provides, that despite the ups and downs, we kind of learn in this phase how to take those peaks and valleys and turn them into something a little more stable and steady. So, the biblical examples, Joseph sold into slavery, Moses and his experience at the burning bush, Jesus when he was tested by Satan for 40 days in the wilderness before he started his ministry. And sometimes we can transition out of this phase by getting our first full-time job, getting married, becoming an adult. We might have a strong sense of call for something. So, that might be, I went to college and I was a Bible major and I felt a strong sense of calling to the mission field and I launched into the mission field right after I graduated, right? That could be a transition out of inner life growth, but it happens differently for everyone. So let's take a couple minutes and think about phase 2 inner life growth. And if we jump ahead to some of the process items, probably don't have time to cover all of these, but number 1 was the integrity check. This is where God kind of tests us internally to see how faithful we're going to be to the inner convictions that we've developed so far in life. So actually, why don't we just stop here, and until the bell rings, I want you to think about if you ever got an integrity check. One that I shared in my life was when I was in late high school, early college. I was in a relationship with a girl, and we dated for about a year or so, and some of the things that were happening in that relationship were testing my integrity. And I won't go into any other details on that, but just say that I had to make a decision on whether or not I was going to hold to my faith or not. And that was an early integrity check for me that I experienced in that phase. So let's take 2-3 minutes. Think about if you ever experienced an integrity check. Read the slide if you need to for context, and then we'll stop there for today. All right, that was bell 2, so if you're in the middle of a thought, feel free to stay and finish it. If not, then we'll see you next week. We'll keep going.